Good morning! We are about an hour away from DC proper. So, we're in that crazy little area they call the DMV, and I am absolutely loving it. This morning has been a very productive morning. Last night, before I went to bed, I discovered I needed to address the power situation. That's right, the power situation. I know it's not something people think about a lot of times, but when you are traveling, you are taking pictures and video and using all these devices, but when you're staying in places that do not have electrical outlets, you are reliant upon your car. So I've been using my car a lot for charging my phone, my GoPro, my camera, all my other devices, and now I'm not going to be having as much time in between my destinations. So I decided to invest in a small battery charger that I'm going to be testing out and seeing if I like it. And if I do, I may get a second one. At Manassas, we have a couple of different things that are of pertinent information for us. Number one, this was one of the first battles of the Civil War. Number two, this was actually also a second battle 13 months later, which allowed the South into the North. So a very interesting site. Now this particular weekend is the 156th anniversary of that second battle. So they have some special events going on. I got a list, several tours, in addition to they're doing some different reenactors and some people who are going to be at some of the sites that we go to. So that's going to be pretty unique. Inside the visitor center, I picked up this, which is a special events flyer, and this, which is a map. So now we're going to go head out onto the battlefield area and check out some of the different stops. Then there is a driving tour, which we're going to take, that's going to take us to several of the other locations and buildings. With this having been two separate battles, it's a twofer. So we're going to have a lot of information here about two very separate times within the Union and Confederate armies. So this one's a little bit different. Oh, did I mention? It's right outside of DC. So we're only about, I want to say, 30 miles outside of DC. So this one was kind of a big one. The fact that it started here and the fact that it also opened up the north, kind of big deal. Kind of big deal. This monument is symbolic of the first battle. That's right, the first battle. This, up here on this big horse, that's Jackson. So he's going to be one of our key role players in this particular battle, which stretches out way around here. And we're going to stop over here at this second marker. Second memorial right here is actually for the fallen Lear Bartow. He actually fell at this very spot, and it took about 6 weeks, but they erected the first monument for this man right here. Now this is of course an upgraded one, but yeah, so that is why that particular spot is really important. He was actually one of the leaders. So these battlefields have a lot of significance for a lot of reasons. So that's a little piece of our history. Now we're moving toward this really big building that looks pretty neat. Let's see what it is. by this big building, which I haven't explored yet, is this monument. This monument is really unique because it is one of the oldest known monuments of the Civil War. They constructed this to honor all the fallen soldiers, and it was one of the last acts that they completed before being discharged from this particular war. Now, this was from the Bull Run. We've all heard of Bull Run, so this is really important. This was a lot of Union soldiers who lost their life here, and this is how they honored their fellow brethren. It's pretty interesting. Now let's go check out this building and find out what its significance is. So at the time of the war, a lot of the places that we have now come to know as battlefields were actually farmlands owned by individuals, and they would ravage across them and have these horrible battles. This particular home is one of those sites. This was the home of Henry Hill and his family. Unknown that there were civilians in the original home, they were peppered with bullets and cannon fire, killing a lot of the people who were in the home. So, as a result, this home was reconstructed several years later by one of the family members and now serves as a museum, which has been improved a little bit. Inside you'll find an air-conditioned area with a video that plays and some signage that tells you a little bit more about the house and the original house. So, 2 families, 1 plot of land, 2 homes, 1 battle. That's basically it. Off to the side of this, you'll see one of the walking trails. They have tons of these around this area, and they have these signs about the battle kind of scattered throughout. So if you are walking or jogging, you can stop off and see these interesting facts about where you're at as you kind of go along. Now there's no real monuments from what I've been told on this one, so we're gonna move this way and start on our driving tour. That should be interesting. If I do, this is going to be cool. Really different. I haven't seen one of these at a battlefield. Oh yeah, one more thing. This little cemetery right here. The people who actually came in and reconstructed the property to its current state were buried here after their passing. So this was their actual home place, and until it became a national park, it was still privately owned by individuals, just like a lot of the battlefield sites still are today. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't take into consideration, is that, again, these were homes. These are family properties. And even though something happened that is of interest to a lot of people, some of them are still privately owned. So you may or may not find an actual place with a setup with cannons and a visitor center at all of the sites. You may go to some place and find out that it's actually a field with corn or cotton or any number of things still being planted and plowed. That doesn't mean that they don't find artifacts. That just means that we can't go and see them. In 1905, the 7th Georgia Infantry reunited and came back to the battlefield, and they created these small marble stones to commemorate the positioning that they held in the Henry Hill area. Of these, originally there were 7. Now, there's only 2. They're very small, and they're placed at 2 places on this battlefield. They feel as though probably between looters and just neglect that the others have disappeared over time, like a lot of artifacts have. So it's interesting to see how a tiny, small, little piece of something that's important can be found amongst all of this chaos that once was here. Now, not always was this area mowed and regularly maintained, which is probably a portion of the reason for the loss, which is also why it's very important that we have places like this that are maintained as public spaces so that you do preserve things so people can learn from them. We have our map. We're in the car. It's time! Driving tour time, that is. That doesn't have near as much of an exciting moment as tool time. Anyway, we're going to go to the first stop on the driving tour. Now, I'm not sure if this one's the one that has the reenactors, but I'm hoping it is. We're gonna check it out. It's pretty busy out here today because they're doing all the special events, but battlefields are so big, it doesn't ever feel too busy. So here we go, and let's see what we can find. Okay, so the cool thing about the driving tour is it gives you the stops themselves. The map doesn't want to work. It gives you the stops themselves, and then you can kind of go along and see where you want to stop. So just because you're stopping off at stop 8 before 2 doesn't mean that it's not going to make sense. It's still going to make sense. The things that they have at each stop are going to tell you what happened at that site. So it's not like you have to go in chronological order. You also have information in the other side of the map that gives you like a brief descriptor as to what you're stopping at. So that's why I'm going out of order. You can too. You can do what you want. It's your tour. Yeah. There's a major road right there. You can see why I didn't want to cross it several times. But on to Groveton. Groveton, there's only two things that still remain here. The Confederate cemetery and a small home right over here on the other side. This used to be an actual community, but only one building remains to tell the story of Groveton itself. So it's very important to know that that is why it's been historically preserved, to tell the story of a community that used to be bustling, that is absolutely non-existent basically now, except for one structure, all because of the war. Now, this particular sign tells a little bit more about the Confederate soldiers that were found in the trenches, approximately 500, and so they commemorated those Confederate soldiers with this monument right here and some loose gravestones as well. This was a relatively small blow for the Confederate Army at this particular battle. It wasn't considered the bloodbath that some of them were, but they still wanted to honor those who had fallen fighting, and so they did so with this very small cemetery in Groveton. Now, to some extent, cemeteries like this are a little different in that whenever you have an area where they couldn't recognize people or they couldn't send people, they basically were mass graves. I'm not saying that all of these are like that, but there are a good portion of the Civil War cemeteries that are in fact unmarked, unknown, and mass graves. So they put together these kind of monuments to honor all of those because they couldn't necessarily tell. The biggest thing that I have noticed at the Civil War cemeteries, you can usually differentiate the North more so than the South because the North wore uniforms a lot more often than the South did. A lot of times the South was considered the good old boys who would just ride in on their horses and help out. They didn't have uniforms. They weren't well funded when it came to things like that. And the Union soldiers were actually the military forces for the United States, so they were put together and pressed, so to speak. So it was easier again to find which ones were which. The Confederates, on the other hand, just lay dead. And unless someone was there to identify them, many times they weren't. Sometimes I think that that's why cemeteries like these are important. Because no matter what side someone fought on, everyone deserves a proper burial. And in many cases, if people weren't identified or couldn't be identified because they weren't wearing a uniform or their troops had already pulled away and they were just left in mass trenches, there was no way to do so. No way to contact the next of kin. No way to tell someone their loved one was not coming home. So they created these kind of cemeteries to give those people, the faceless, nameless, and those who had gone and served, a way to have a final resting place that was final. To give them a place to lay their head. And now we cut across the parking lot to the other remaining part of this community, the single lone structure.
Watched the fighting at Henry Hill. Between 1861 1862, her two oldest daughters died of typhoid fever.
Oh, Lord.
So you can see all the tragedy, but they said throughout all of this she remained very, very positive. She was a very, very devout woman. She was one of the early members of the Sudley Church. As a matter of fact, her funeral was held at the
very cool interpretive tour there. The lady who actually owned this house was here when the war started. She got a heads up that they were about to have a battle and relocated her children. But when she came back, the entire yard around her and all of the land was basically covered in bloody, maimed soldiers of all shapes, forms, and fashions. She, along with a couple of other members of the little community at the time, put together a big barrel of water and took it out to the battlefield and told them she didn't care if they were in gray or if they were in blue. If they needed a drink, she was going to take care of them. She later became known as one of the best humanitarians of this particular battle. She wasn't able to get any kind of financial aid for them destroying and demolishing her land, however, because she was compassionate toward the Confederates. So, because she had a compassionate heart, she was basically knocked out of getting anything for all the damages that were done, anything for all the things that she lost. But it didn't matter. She stayed here and actually in this area until she passed away some many years later. She was very active, and she sets a good example for all of us. We should all be spunky and caring, just like she was. I'm so mad at myself right now. I left my little church fan. It's hot outside. It's getting super hot. I wasn't expecting this. We're almost to the Bronner farm, and they're doing an exhibition out here, so we're gonna catch it just in time, it looks like. I think I have like 1 minute to spare. Just in time. They're doing the demo. Wrapped up watching the really amazing interpretive program that they had about the guns and the artillery. I went into the house back there. It was more of an extension of the original museum, telling you a little bit more about how it was constructed, what the soldiers that came through there might have looked like, some of the artifacts that were found in this area that was considered to be the Bronner farm. All in all, pretty cool. I will say this particular site here at Manassas is a lot different than the other battlefields that I've gone to on this trip and others, simply because how they present the facts to you. And coming here on the 156th anniversary, probably a smart move. Lots of interpretive programs for you to interact with, to ask questions, to see how things actually worked, and it's a more complete story that way. So I'm gonna try to make another stop before we call it a day here in Manassas. All in all though, I'm excited that we came here. Again, like everything else, we learn a little bit more about our future by visiting our past. And this is a very unique experience here at Manassas. Okay, last but not least, we're gonna stop off at the Stone House. This is actually close to the visitors center, so here's one of those things. I said I wasn't gonna do it, but I decided to take this particular spot for last. There's a reason for that. It is because it is something that has some significance, and I think it's a good way for us to end our day here at Manassas. And it's two, I'm not going in order, so don't hold me to it. There's Stone Bridge, there's the railroad, there's other big signs, but there is other structure on top of that. So what is the significance of this particular house, other than the fact that it looks cool whenever you come in? It's the Stone House, and originally there was an army that set up right behind this to use it as a cover for their headquarters. But not only that, the property itself later became a hospital for those who were wounded. A lot of properties became those kind of sites, but this one is of substantial size and housed a lot of fallen soldiers. So we're gonna go check it out and see if they have any of those kind of informative pieces in here. I'm sure they do. And like I said, this is one of the first things that you see when you actually come into the park. If you turn that way, you go to the visitors center, and if you come straight back this way, you get to the Stone Bridge. So it's kind of like a hub and a must-see. Being that it's the 156th anniversary, there's actually someone inside, so we can find out more. Of the buildings, we can actually go upstairs on this one, and there's something that the ranger just told me about that is of special interest, a little carving in the floor from some actual soldiers. Now anybody can say that they have soldier carvings or some kind of thing like that, but this one can be substantially dated back to whenever they were passing through and actually used this as an aid station. Woo! House, perfect ending to Manassas. Can you imagine just one day you're sitting in your tavern where you also might host a extra person from time to time because you're on a major highway, and then all of a sudden troops come in on that highway and basically take over your entire space and use you as a traveling hospital, not once but twice within a calendar year? Wow, I can't imagine. And something else I learned about this was this highway that we're talking about right here, that actually is a highway, split the battlefield. So this just goes to show that battlefields weren't just in the middle of nowhere, in a field, or in the forest. Nope, they were along major roads too. They were everywhere. Battles were literally everywhere. Speaking of highways though, we're about to get on this highway and we're going to head on down the road. That's right, we're going to get on the highway and go on to our next location. So I will see you guys tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed Manassas with me. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribing, well, you should be, so just hit the little subscribe button. No big deal. I'm not going to be upset that you hadn't done it yet. And let me have your feedback as to what you thought about Manassas today and if you've ever been to a battlefield.